Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's episode of Learn with Lorna, episode number 186, where we are taking a deeper look at the Davidson collection held in Nucleus. My name's Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. We have 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, in Fort William, in Portree and Wick. And it is a collection from Wick and our Caithness archives held at Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archive, that we're going to be looking at today. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. There's a link on our website to be able to do so. And if you're a UK resident and you're doing that, then please could we also ask that you add gift aid onto that, because it gives us another 25% donation, which makes a huge difference to us. So as I said last week, we're into our last month before the summer break, and I pre-recorded this one as I'm on leave for a few days. And as I said, this week we are returning to a subject we initially looked at 2 years ago in Learn with Lorna episode 99, the Davidson collection held in Caithness. After I did that episode, my colleague Valerie said to me, we should do another one because there's so much in that collection, there's so much content, so many stories that we could absolutely do another episode about it. So here we are 2 years later, returning to the collection, and once again I am indebted to Val for her work, her knowledge, her passion about this collection, and for compiling the notes and examples that have enabled me to write this episode. So thank you very, very much to Val for all of that. So let's get started looking at the Davidson collection. The collection is P566 and it comprises 10 linear metres of records dating from 1711 through to 2019, and it includes farm records, legal papers, financial records, personal correspondence, military records, photographs, portraits, published works, all sorts of material. But it's split into 4 quite distinct sections, and so that's how we're going to look at this collection today, with examples chosen by Val to illustrate the breadth of material that this collection holds. So you'll see several sort of disparate stories, but with a connecting link all the way through them. There are papers in this collection relating to the Davidson family, the Miller family, the Swanson family, and to the Rothsay and Caithness fencibles. Now, the 3 families are linked together through marriages, and George Swanson was a captain in the Rothsay and Caithness fencibles in the 1st Battalion and paymaster of the regiment. So that explains why the 4th section sits alongside. And it's often that way with collections, that they, as you'll know from your own family, people marry other families, so then bits of their story comes into your story. And then as generations move down, you sort of incorporate more and more of other people's stories. And then if you're involved in something like the fencibles, then those records also become intertwined in your personal collection. So as I say, 4 distinct sections, but very clearly linked together. We're going to start by looking at the Davidsons. These Davidson records start with John Davidson of Buckies and his wife Elizabeth Ross of Gladfield, who were married on the 7th of January 1781. They had 10 sons and 3 daughters, 3 of whom died in infancy. So that's where the collection starts, in the 1700s, with this particular part of the collection. But we're not going to start with them, we're not going to look at the early family members today. We're going to move 4 generations forward of that Davidson line to look at the story of Jack Davidson. And it was Jack Davidson's photo that I used to advertise this episode. So if you've still got access to go back and have a look at that, then you can see the face of the man I'm talking about. John Henry Davidson, to give him his full name, was born on the 30th of October 1909 at Old Hall, Wotton, to George and Netta Davidson. He was named John Henry Davidson after his grandfather, but was often shortened to Jack. And his early life was spent on the farm at Old Hall. But when his father died, young, at the age of 52 in 1918, he and his mother moved from there to Ormley Hall in Thurso. And Jack attended Miller Academy in Thurso before going on to Edinburgh University, where he got a BSc in agriculture, going on to purchase Lower Dunray Farm in 1930 when he came of age. And also in 1930, Jack enlisted in the Ray Company of the 5th Battalion Seaforth Highlanders. Having that university degree meant that he was eligible for a commission, and so he went to Sandhurst, training to become an officer, and came back as a lieutenant. In December 1937, he married Isabel Stewart of Thurso, and their daughter Elizabeth was born the following year. And you can possibly see what I'm building up to here. If they were married in 37, the child was born in 38. Of course, in 1939, the outbreak of World War II would come to cause chaos to his life as to so many others. And Jack was called to serve as a major in D Company of the 5th Seaforth Highlanders in the 51st Highland Division. And he was off to North Africa. Within this collection are a series of letters, but also an account that Jack wrote of his experiences in North Africa, but also letters that he wrote about that, particularly to his uncle Jack, who he shared his name with, John Henry Davidson. He wrote to his uncle Jack, who was in Buckies near Thurso. And like others at that time, Jack wasn't able to talk about his actions, his experiences, what he'd seen, or specific locations that he was in, because of course during the war people were not allowed to write that amount of detail to the people back at home because the censors would have intercepted that. But instead he writes about everyday life and what it's like to exist in the desert and how different that is from his normal life back home in Caithness. So letters like this. 22nd of February 1943. My dear Uncle Jack, it's now quite a long time since I last wrote, and as I have both time and opportunity at the moment, here goes. In point of fact, I am in hospital. Jaundice, a commonish disease in this part of the world. I thought I had escaped when we had a slight epidemic about Christmas time, but different from other people as usual, I chose to get mine in February. I was not very sympathetic with those people who had it, but I've changed my outlook a bit now. The first week is not very pleasant, but after that life becomes rather more tolerable. To begin with, one just can't eat a thing, but now I've developed a most indecent appetite. Indecent appetite. Fortunately, food is quite plentiful and very good, so all is well. Chicken is the main article of diet, also tripe, most excellent tripe. As soon as I saw the stuff, I thought of you. I started being jaundiced in Tripoli and was rather surprised to find that I was evacuated right back to Egypt in a series of stages. 2 hops by plane and 1 by train. It was rather interesting moving eastwards over the desert that we had fought over going westwards. A lot of after-battle chaos still remained. Burned out trucks, tanks and goodness knows what not. Nearly all jerry stuff. But large quantities have been salvaged now and the place is clearing up. I think I shall become a scrap iron merchant in the Middle East after the war is finished. I eventually came to rest in a base hospital about a week ago and things are going pretty well. I was up and about a bit yesterday and it'll just be a matter of time before I rejoin the battalion at the front again. We've had our share of things out here since we arrived, but on the whole I reckon we're lucky compared with some, but we have lost a number of valuable chaps. I miss Murdo a lot. He and I seemed to do a lot together, and I was with him not a few minutes before he was killed in the El Alamein battle. Actually, he was very badly wounded and died shortly after he got to the dressing station. And Murdo, that he's referring to in that letter, is Captain Murdoch Swanson of the 5th Seaforths, who farmed at Watton Mains and was just 33 at the time of his death. He goes on to say Charlie Wares was killed about a month ago. We had to deal with a jerry rearguard position and a bloody little battle ensued for an hour or two. Finally, the Hun fled and that was that. However, I expect you read about these things in the newspaper and I'd better not say more in case the censor comes down on my top. Sufficient to say that the Highland Division has done its job all right. We all arrived in Tripoli feeling very cheerful and with our tails pretty high. The boys will be off again by now, I expect, and I'm going to have a terrible job to catch them up, as they have a 2,000-mile start on me now. I don't know how long it's going to take to heave the Hun out of North Africa, but he is going out certain, and after that, goodness knows what will happen to us. He goes on to talk about the landscapes, talk about the environment of what it's like to look around and see desert round him. So these are a couple of extracts. You have an equally flat type of desert, limitless but almost covered with shrubby bushes. I've spotted about a dozen different types and I would like to take them home to the rock garden. They are all in flower just now, different colours of blues and pinks and some bright scarlet. In between them there's a sort of wild stalk which bloom with great profusion. The effect of it all is a vast sea of brilliant colours stretching out as far as the eye can see. The only blot on the landscape is the occasional knocked out German tank rusting away to nothingness in the middle of it all, a reminder of bygone horrors. At night the air is laden with the scent of that stalk. It's really beautiful descriptive writing. So he's describing the flat bit of the desert, but then he says you also have the rocky desert, outcrop everywhere and fairly large and steep escarpments here and there with rocky tablelands on top. Very often you get this type of country near the coast, and it nearly always merges into the silver white sand dunes bordering the Mediterranean itself. This is the type of desert we all detest. It breaks your heart trying to dig trenches in it, and yet you know you must, or else. It harbours scorpions and ants and all manner of horrors, especially if it has been inhabited by the Italians ahead of us, because they leave all manner of obnoxious fleas behind them. So a very, very, very descriptive about life and the environment and the conditions and what he's dealing with, without giving away any material that the censor might have taken. Jack was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for gallantry in the final battle of the North African campaign in Tunisia, the fight for Romana Ridge. The citation referenced particularly his skill and his daring in what he had achieved. He wrote to his uncle he nearly died of shock at receiving it. He had no idea that it was in the air at all, and said he thought it would take a bit of living up to. So that was 1943. And about a month after he received that DSO, on the 4th of August 1943, Jack was killed in the battle for Sferno Hills in Sicily. He was 33 years old. And that's where he's buried, in Sicily. This is an extract from a book written by Alistair Borthwick about the battalion's experiences, and it includes this very touching description of the battle for which he won the Distinguished Service Order. The story for the fight of Point 198, the vital height upon which the success of the whole battalion depended, centres around one man, Major J. H. Davidson, who commanded D Company. Jack Davidson was a farmer from Caithness, and those who knew him before the war say he was a very good farmer. He was a big man, beautifully built, a born fighter and leader of men, but a hater of war. He was intelligent. Most of the things that are usually said about people in obituary notices could be said about Jack Davidson with complete sincerity. And if he had lived, I do not doubt that he would have commanded a battalion, only to wash his hands of it with relief when the war ended and he could go back to his farming. He was a good man and a brave man. He and perhaps 20 others fought the Romana battle almost alone. I was saying to Val when I read that I was so struck by that line. I have no doubt he could have commanded a battalion, only to wash his hands of it with relief and go back to farming. I think very few people can both shoulder responsibility but also know how to relinquish it. This was a tribute that was written by another Caithness soldier, published in the John O'Groat Journal. Since the battalion landed here, we have had our ups and downs, but our greatest loss was undoubtedly Major Davidson. During the short time he lived after being wounded, we all had good hopes of his recovery, but complications set in. Unfortunately, he did not survive to wear his recently acquired decoration, which we are all agreed should have been the VC. He was one of the finest officers and leaders of men that this battalion ever had. His widow Isabel and his daughter Elizabeth, a couple of years old, stayed at Lower Dounreay until 1945, when they emigrated to South Africa. And Val and I were saying how clear it is what high esteem he was held in by his men. and how tragic it was that he didn't get home, but also we were discussing how many times that story must have been replicated around the country in both the First World War and the Second World War. So we'll go now from the Davidson section of the collection onto the Miller part. Jack's uncle, James Davidson, married Margaret Miller of Scrapster. And if you remember Learn with Lorna episode 99, it was their story that we covered, James and Gretty. Absolutely brilliant story. And within the Miller family papers, so Margaret Miller, who married James Davidson, within her family's papers are legal documents, correspondence and records relating to Reverend William Miller, Margaret's uncle. And these papers date from 1826 through to 1962. William Miller was born in Thurso on the 13th of January 1838 to William Miller, shipowner and merchant, and Elizabeth Gunn. His childhood was spent with his grandfather and his aunt in Dale, and he went on to boarding school in Aberdeen before going to Marischal College in Aberdeen and then to Edinburgh University, where he studied theology. And I wanted to share with you, I know I've done this several times in the past, particularly when it's a collection that my colleagues in Caithness have researched for me, that there is no point me summarising something that Val has written so eloquently, so I will read it to you in Val's words. This is the summary of the Reverend William Miller's career and his influence, and the influence that lasted after his life. After his studies at Edinburgh University, he assisted the minister of Free St George's Church in Edinburgh before taking charge of St David's Mission there. The mission and the school which John Anderson had established in Madras in India on the 3rd of April 1837 was failing, and William Miller was seen as the strong figure who could build upon what Anderson had begun. Before he left for India, Miller delivered 2 courses of lectures in Thurso, one of which was entitled Our Scandinavian Forefathers, and we have a printed copy of that in Caithness in the archive. The lectures were in aid of a fund for building an infant classroom and a washing house for the Thurso Benevolent Institution, which was intended for the education of the female children of the poor for the town and the neighbourhood of Thurso. So he's creating a legacy within his local area and within Thurso for the education of girls and for the support of the poor. But then he goes to India, to Madras, to support the work started by John Anderson. And Val continues, on arrival in India in December 1862, aged 24, Miller set about reorganising the mission, putting education at the centre of its work. By 1867, the school had become a first-grade college. Miller wanted other Protestant denominations of the Christian Church to be involved in maintaining the college, and so on the 1st of January 1877, the institution became Madras Christian College, the name that it still goes by today. The library, I'm reading 2 lines, the library at the Madras Christian College is named the Miller Memorial Library after Reverend William Miller. In 1871, Miller's aunt, Mrs. Margaret Gunn of Latheron, endowed the library with £1,000 in memory of her husband, Donald Gunn. In 1901, a statue of Reverend William Miller was erected by public subscription in the grounds of Madras Christian College. He returned to Scotland and passed away on the 15th of July 1923 in Edinburgh, aged 85. He was buried in Thurso Cemetery. So a long-standing connection with the importance of education, with the supporting of people to enable educational aims, and also a long-standing connection with India there. And he's not the only family member. There are other family members within this collection who talk about life in India and their experiences there. I particularly enjoyed one written by a lady writing back to Gretty, so James and Gretty, and writing back and saying, make sure James does this thing. If he doesn't, he'll hear me in his deaf ear all the way from here. I thought it was a marvellous description. But within this part of the collection are letters written by Reverend William Miller to his niece Gretty. And you might remember from Learn with Lorna 99, and if you don't, do go and have a look because it's a lovely, lovely story, that Margaret and James had a long wait to be married. They kept meeting opposition. They kept having to try and get their marriage to take place. And her uncle references that in a letter to Gretty. He writes, "I am heartily glad that things have come right at last." But he also says he's not going to offer too many congratulations until the event has actually taken place. And in 1910, when James and Gretty's daughter Margaret was born, William was living in Bridge of Allan, and he wrote to congratulate Gretty on the birth of her daughter, and this is what he writes. May the 12th, 1910. My dear Gretty, I thank you very much for remembering your old uncle, as you have shown that you do, by the box of eggs which duly came and has been duly attended to. There was no precise indication of who it came from, but I have no doubt that it came from you and was the product of the Loch of Stempster. I have heard from interest from your father about the baptism of your bairn, and you will believe that she and her parents have my heartiest good wishes. I am not worse than usual, but for a variety of reasons I have been of late much inconvenienced and pressed for time, so that I am unable to do anything beyond thanking you. So I conclude with love to you all, especially to Miss Margaret Ingalls Miller Davidson, and I hope you will, in some fashion of your own, make some knowledge of my love reach her young ladyship. I thought that was lovely. I hope you will, in some fashion of your own, make some knowledge of my love reach her young ladyship. With kind regards to all other friends, as you have the opportunity, your affectionate uncle. And when James went off to serve in the First World War, William wrote to Gretty, and his letter starts with him wishing or praying for protection on James, praying for his safe recovery, his safe return from conflict, that he'll be able to stay in touch with Gretty. But his letter concludes with the words, I am unable to send long letters to anyone, and shall therefore say nothing about the war, although you may be sure that, like everyone else, I am constantly thinking about it. He also notes to her his pleasure to hear that both the ladies and the men are all doing their part in Caithness, and says it's the same where I am. Everybody is doing whatever they can. I mentioned that William died in 1923 at the age of 85, and it's very clear that he left a legacy both in India but also here through the papers he leaves behind. If we move now on to the third section of this collection, the papers of the Swanson family. This is Val's explanation for how these families are linked, how the Swanson family is linked in to those others that I've already mentioned, because again, it will be much clearer if I read Val's description. I quite often find when I'm trying to work out these familial links that I have to draw a little tiny family tree next to me. Alexander Henderson was the tacksman of Stempster and became tenant of Gerston in 1736, where he lived until his death in 1743. His daughter Christian married Francis Swanson in 1726, and Francis became tenant of Gerston in 1751 or 2, tacksman for Sir John Sinclair of Ulster. Francis and Christian Swanson's son, George, inherited the tenancy of Gerston, and he was also a captain in the 1st Battalion of the Rothsay and Caithness Fencibles and paymaster of the regiment. He married Jean Calder in 1783. And then George and Jean Swanson's son, James Calder Swanson, married Margaret Davidson of Buckies in 1836. So we've got a link there between the Swansons and the Davidsons that we started with. But it goes on to say that James and Margaret Swanson's daughter, so they got married, that James Swanson and Margaret Davidson got married, and then they had a daughter, Elizabeth Ann Joanna, who married John Henry Davidson, Margaret's nephew. So again, there's another connection between the two families there. The papers in this series date from 1711 to 2019, but mainly cover the period 1711 to 1880. They include tax, correspondence and legal papers concerning the lands of Gerston, Halkirk, Bridgend of Halkirk, Swanson's tenements, Pennyland, Harn, and other lands, Ham, and other lands and properties belonging to the Swanson family. correspondence, both business related and personal, financial records, including records of land rentals and accounts for building work, but also the records of Gerston Distillery, which was built by the Swanson family in 1795 on land next to the Thurso River. Production was small in scale but high in quality, and the whisky produced was in demand at home and abroad. It was said to have been a favourite of Prime Minister Robert Peel. The distillery closed in 1875 after 80 years following the death of James Calder Swanson the previous year. So the family are involved in distilling, also in farming. So the 1851 census describes James as a farmer of 220 acres and also owning the distillery. But in the final ones, that's him in 1851, in the 1871 census, just before he dies, he's listed as a farmer of 862 acres. So it's a considerable undertaking, and also one that's grown quite a lot. So included in this part of the collection in the Swanson papers are letters written by Jean Swanson to her husband George, including this one, written in 1798 when he was serving in the Rothsay and Caithness Fencibles at a camp near Morpeth. Now Morpeth, as some of you will know, is in the north of England. It's about 370 miles from Gerston and Caithness, a journey of over 7 hours by car today. And when I thought that would have seemed such a long way to go for training to serve in the 1700s. And here are some extracts from one of Jean's letters to her husband. Your most agreeable letter, my dearest, of the 23rd of August I was favoured with, which as usual always adds new life and spirits to me. Isn't that a nice way to start a letter? Particularly as there is some little prospect of seeing you once more at Gerston, for I suppose you are so used to good houses since you left Caithness that you can hardly look at my black chimney piece. I am not making myself certain of seeing you until I hear further from you about it. I would have made Christy write you, but I was not altogether sure of Sir John, and her letter is hardly worth postage. But as you wish her to answer your letter, which is the least she can do, I will make her write soon. We have had an exceeding fine harvest, and the appearance of a plentiful crop. Our corns are all cut, and the beer and a good part of the oats in the yard in excellent order. The country in general seems to be in great forwardness with the harvest. So, updates on her excitement that he might be getting home, talking about the harvest, and then the cost of things. I am really vexed, my dear, that commission from Edinburgh for me cost you so much money. I never figured it would be near such a sum as it was, but everything being sent so fine came up to so much money. Mrs. Sinclair wrote me that she had sent everything as she would have chose for herself, provided Mr. Sinclair could have afforded it as well as you, but I would have been well content with less expense, as I am little exposed to wearing such fashionable things where I am at present, but it was your goodness to desire her to send them of the best kind, which she really has done. If I go to Thurso this winter, I may have some occasion for some of it. The ladies there have turned amazingly gay of late. So I love that thing of going, oh, you've spent so much money on me and sending all this stuff up, but I really appreciate your kindness, but you didn't have to do that. She finishes by saying, you mentioned having some rooms provided in Thurso in case of your being home. Mr. Cummings' house is only let till Martinmas, so any part of it you wish to keep for yourself, or for my going in with the children, please let me know by the first letter you write. So if you want me to stop a rental carrying on, because it's coming to the end of its period, let me know and I'll stop that there, and then I can go in and wait for you. Mr. Cowan, who has the principal part of it just now, goes to a house that is newly built. I hear of no other houses of yours, but Mr. Manson can inform you of this better than I can, in case you would not choose to break the rent of that house by keeping a part of it. I will make the chairs and other things that I have do very well until you can be at the choosing of them yourself, as you will be the best judge of what is needed. With sincere love and best wishes in which the bairn joins, I am ever, my dearest, yours, Jean Swanson. So she's writing to him while he is serving in the Rothsay and Caithness Fencibles. And that takes us to the last part of this collection. Who are the Rothsay and Caithness Fencibles? This is Val's description. In 1794, Sir John Sinclair of Ulster raised a Fencible regiment for unlimited service within Great Britain. The regiment was the 8th Fencible Infantry to be established. The 7 regiments that preceded it were limited to serving in Scotland. This one would serve across the UK. In October 1794, the new regiment was embodied at Inverness and inspected by Lieutenant General Sir Hector Munro of Navarre, who I've spoken about previously. The regiment was originally called the Caithness Fencibles, but as the counties of Bute and Caithness were joined in a parliamentary constituency, and the Prince of Wales wanted to add the name of his chief title in Scotland, the battalion became the Rothesay and Caithness Fencible Regiment. Before the end of the year, a 2nd battalion was raised for service in Great Britain and Ireland. In May 1795, the new battalion was embodied at Forfar and inspected by Major General James Hamilton. The 1st Battalion was disbanded in 1799. Troops were needed in Ireland, and so Sir John Sinclair was instructed to raise the strength of the 2nd Battalion from 600 to 1,000 men. The extra men came mainly from the disbanded 1st Battalion. In 1798, a rebellion against British rule in Ireland had been launched by the Society of United Irishmen. They were defeated, and in 1801 Ireland became a formal part of the United Kingdom. The 2nd Battalion, Rothesay and Caithness Fencibles, also known as the Caithness Highlanders, served in Ireland until 1802, when the regiment was disbanded. George Swanson of Gerston joined the 1st Battalion of the Rothesay and Caithness Fencibles as a lieutenant on the 7th of March 1794, and later became a captain of a company of the 1st Battalion and paymaster of the regiment. And within this part of the collection, within this series of records, there are official orders, notices of appointments to military ranks, financial records, and correspondence. And in that correspondence section, there is a 1799 letter from Robert McGilligan, written to Swanson, describing his expectation that the regiment would be disbanded following the unfortunate affair, in which Lieutenant Yates has accused 5 fellow officers of cowardice. The letter includes these references. I mentioned the unfortunate affair that happened in the regiment. It is daily more alarming, and I would not be surprised if the regiment was ordered to be disbanded for it before this reaches you. Indeed, I intend leaving it for one as soon as possible. Lieutenant Yates got 400 of the cards I formerly mentioned printed and circulated. I don't know what the cards are. He has sent them all over Britain and Ireland. He has since been ordered under arrest for sending challenges, but I am sorry to find by the day's orders that he is acquitted and the others are to be tried. Shocking. 2 counts of inquiry have lately been held respecting this business, and the members were more on their side than even the last court-martial. Indeed, the whole country is upon the Yates side. How it will end, God only knows, but I am afraid that these officers will never get over it. And then he sends the... I've just made the connection of what I just said. So this is the annex that he attaches to it, describing what was in those things that were printed. Headquarters, Durham, 13th of January 1799. G.O. Major General Lord Fielding, having read and considered the report of the Court of Inquiry held on Lieutenant Yates of the Rothesay and Caithness Regiment of Fencible Infantry, and of the conduct of the officers of the detachment of that regiment stationed at South Shields, is pleased to express his disapprobation of Lieutenant Yates' conduct in publishing and sending to Colonel Est, holding a high official situation on the staff of this district, a printed card stigmatising 5 of his brother officers as cowards. I didn't know if there was more detail within them. His lordship, however, considering the provocation Lieutenant Yates had received and the peculiarity of the circumstances in which he had been placed, does not think fit to proceed further against him for the said irregularity, that this public expression of his disapprobation, and Lieutenant Yates is released from his arrest. So, Yates has said that these 5 are guilty of cowardice, has had that printed and published and distributed. I don't know what the provocation was that caused him to do that. The statement goes on, with respect to Captain David Campbell, Lieutenant John Sinclair, Lieutenant Evans, Lieutenant Hall and Ensign Mackay, the Major General being of the opinion that their conduct will be a proper subject for the instigation of a court-martial, he hereby orders them into an arrest, until the pleasure of His Royal Highness the Commander-in-Chief be made known, to whom his Lordship intends, without delay, to submit a statement of the whole proceedings. P.S. The 5 officers were desired to bring forward at the Court of Inquiry any charges against Yates, but having none other but their conduct at the last court-martial, it hurt them very much to mention it, they having received sentence for it, and no more notice should be taken of it. And as to their scandalous abuse of the officers on that occasion, the court said it should have been brought forward sooner, and not to harbour a revenge of a year and a half. I am afraid of Campbell in particular. So, I feel like I'm giving you half a story there, that he said he has accused them of cowardice. It seems like the country is very much on his side because of the provocation he got. There we go. So, evidence of intrigue within the Fencibles to be found within this collection as well. I'm hoping someone is now going to go away and fully research that story and let me know what happened. So, as always, I've only picked, or Val and I have only picked a small selection of the documents within this collection to tell you just some of the stories that this collection contains. So I hope that if you're in the Caithness area or able to get there, you can have a bit of time to go in and have a look at this wonderful collection that takes us from intrigue in the Fencibles in the 1790s all the way through to the tragic loss of life of the Second World War and beyond into the 21st century. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you very much for joining me. Next week I hope you can join me where we'll be looking at stories of bravery from across our offices. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards us, and if you're in the UK, if you're able to gift aid to us, then we are very grateful for that. Thank you.